The world that Carrie comes out of, the prosecutor, is the world of real hard truths about life and death and laws. And Hollywood is over here doing other things, playing make-believe. So I just witnessed that, and it felt to me kind of like a reckoning.
Hi there. This episode is an interview with filmmaker Rachel Mason about, among other things, her documentary, The Last Take, about the movie set of Rust. That was the film where Alec Baldwin accidentally shot and killed, tragically, a young cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins. The conversation was recorded on May 27th, and I am glad to finally be able to bring it to you. Meanwhile, I have a couple of announcements about stuff coming up. The first is a book event for the Catastrophe Hour, my book, which I'm holding up here if you're watching this on video. This is happening in New York City at the Village Underground, September 3rd. I will be in conversation with best-selling author and friend of the pod, Lionel Shriver. It is going to be amazing. Lionel is one of the most exciting and unique and provocative and memorable voices out there. And so I know we're going to have a great conversation about my work, her work, all kinds of stuff. Tickets are $25, but if you purchase before August 1st with the promo code, we will be able to sell it to you for $18. Go to megandown.com/events to find out more about that. September 3rd, 6 p.m., New York City. Okay, the second thing, you've heard me talking about it. I'm going to keep talking about it. This is the Unspeakeasy Co-Ed Retreat, also in New York, October 11th and 12th. Seats are filling up fast. This is bigger than our usual retreats, but still very limited in size. This is a really unique kind of thing. We're going to have speakers and panels, but then the conversations will very quickly open up into group discussions, not just audience Q&As, but you will actually be able to interact with your intellectual heroes. And those include John McWhorter, Carol Hooven, Rob Henderson, Mike Pesca, Peter Moskos, Alana Newhouse, Andrew Hartz, Ben Appel, and Lisa Sellen Davis, to name just a few. I will be there. You should be there. This is really a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. We're going to give you lunch. It's going to be in a beautiful space in Soho. It's totally private. Nothing is recorded. There's no social media because that's how we do things at the Unspeakeasy. It is not cheap, can't be cheap. Don't do things that way. But we are offering some specials. So go to the Unspeakeasy /NYC to find out about that. We've got some promo codes to help you out. Okay. I think that's all you need to know now. Thanks for putting up with this announcement. And here's my interview with Rachel. Enjoy. Welcome to the Unspeakable Podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Down. On October 21st, 2021, a tragic accident happened while shooting the film Rust. Actor Alec Baldwin's prop gun fired a real bullet, injuring the director and killing the cinematographer, Halyna Hutchins. The event became a major news story, and as legal battles played out, the media attention overshadowed the deep personal loss experienced by those close to Halyna. The documentary Last Take, Rust and the Story of Halyna, made by Halyna's friend Rachel Mason, looks beyond the headlines to focus on what really happened and how it's affected those involved. The film shares firsthand stories from people who were on the set, as well as stories from friends and colleagues still dealing with the aftermath of the tragedy. As a longtime admirer of Rachel's work, I wanted to talk with her about this project, as well as some of her past work, which includes the 2019 film Circus of Books, about the adult bookstore her parents owned for years in Los Angeles that was a mainstay of the gay community in the Silver Lake neighborhood. I also wanted to touch on her recent series, An Update on Our Family, which looks into the world of family vlogs, focusing mainly on the story of Myka and James Stauffer, prominent YouTubers who showcased their family until challenges with an adopted child led to devastating choices. This is a great conversation. We also touch at the end on a project Rachel is currently working on that involves a collective solving of a legendary cold case murder in LA. We cover a lot of ground, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Here's Rachel Mason. Rachel Mason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Meghan. I'm excited to be here.
I'm such a fan of your work, and there's a lot we can talk about. I want to talk today mostly about Halyna Hutchins, who was a friend of yours. She's the director of photography who was shot and killed on the set of the film Rust, which Alec Baldwin was starring in and producing. This happened in 2021. Incredibly tragic and confusing situation. You have a new documentary out about it. Maybe we should just start right there. Can you talk about your relationship to Halyna?
Well, I shifted my camera just so you could see that hat right behind me, because that's actually her hat. And in fact, there's two right there, one on top of the other. And that's the hat she was wearing on the set of Rust. And when she died, her widower gave me so many important possessions and things of hers, not just because he wanted me to make this documentary, but because, you know, in the moment of grief, when you're dealing with the volume of stuff of a person, you sort of don't know what to do. And I wanted Matt to not get rid of a single thing. And so I wore that hat throughout the entire process of making the film, when I was in the courtroom or conducting interviews. And so I appreciate that you want to talk about her, because, you know, I could spend a lifetime talking about her. It's an unbelievable tragedy to me personally that she's not with us.
So can we just start with this particular project? We should say that she was a cinematographer. There are not a lot of female directors of photography. It's a pretty male-dominated job. What did she know about this production going into it? I know she took it very seriously. She had a lot of very particular ideas about the aesthetic of the production and what she wanted to do. Do you remember your conversations with her as she approached the project?
Well, you know, again, this is one of these things that if hindsight was 2020, I would have sat her down and been like, Halyna, let's talk about every single thing, including safety. Is this a safe production? But in reality, when Halyna would go out on her various projects, I wouldn't be right there with her talking about them, because our relationship was more like, let's go for a hike with our kids. Our kids are friends, and or let's just sit down and have coffee and talk about future projects that we might want to do. So she would fill me in on interesting stories that would happen usually after the fact, but I didn't know a whole lot about this project at all, because the last time I saw her was over the summer. It was also kind of COVID times. We were, you know, not spending as much time together. And so it kills me that I just didn't know a lot about the project until after she died, and was reading her notebooks and looking at, you know, her archive of emails and text messages. And, you know, things come together fairly quickly. In the film industry, you also often don't even know that you're getting a job until, you know, you've been in the running. Joel Souza, the director, was interviewing a handful of different people, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, I got the job. Cool. When does it start? In a week. Get your shit together. You know, I'm not the person she would be calling. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we curse here? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Wouldn't be the first time.
Okay. Yeah. It's like, I wouldn't be the person she would be calling at that moment. She'd be calling her gaffer, her ACs, all the people technical, like the budget, like, let's get it together. So when the green light happens on a project, and also often you aren't really allowed to say anything. You have an NDA, especially, you know, a celebrity involved like Alec Baldwin. I would have, you know, including when I look at all of her text messages at that time, she was just in technical mode, like looking for her crew. And this is one of those things you have to admire so much about not just Halyna, but really anyone in the indie sphere of cinematography. There's this real amazing combination of things you have to have, which is creativity, for one, vision, all that stuff, which is just your, pure abilities over here and talent. But then on the other hand, you also have to have like a Rolodex of people you can rely on, kind of a background of budget, like who you can actually afford and all these different things. So in Halyna's text messages, I just saw all of it coming together. Oh, okay, I'm going to reach out to these top 5 people first, and her handwritten notes about these people. So she was just in go mode when she got the job. And speaking to her agent, Craig, who's in our film, I think it's really helpful to also get his perspective for people that don't know about what this opportunity meant for her or any cinematographer at that moment in their career. Like, wow, you get to do a Western? That is cool.
Yeah.
So Halyna's brain clicked into like, what a great opportunity. And then secondly, Joel Souza, who is horrible that the world only knows of him as the guy who made a film where someone died, but he was a really cool, creative, fantastically interesting director. So she would have met him and been like instantly bonded with like, let's get some wide shots, like just creative pulses, just boom, 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 let's do this. And I know that because I know Joel, and that's how he is. He's exciting to talk to when you're a creative person, like dreaming up fantastical ideas for, a movie.
Okay, so we should say, just in case people haven't really followed this or they need a refresher, this movie was being shot in New Mexico in 2021. It was an independent film. I don't know if shoestring budget is quite the term, but it was definitely not a high budget production. It's a Western, which means there's guns on set. There are scenes with a lot of shooting. There is there's a job on a movie set where there are guns involved called an armorer. And this is somebody whose job it is to maintain the guns, right? How would you even describe that job?
Yeah, you said it exactly right. It's the person whose job, everything revolving around guns is entirely in the armorer is responsible for guns on set. Plain and simple. If there's a gun on set, the armorer is responsible for it, meaning they need to know where it is at all times. They need to know how it's been handled. They need to know what is in it, exactly what is in it in each gun on set. And sometimes, like on John Wick, there might be hundreds of armorers, but on this film, it's a smaller budget project. There was one armorer. In this, and in fact, I was going to say interesting timing for our episode because she just got out of jail yesterday. Hannah Gutierrez.
Yes, she got. She was released from prison on parole on May 23rd, so a couple of days ago.
Yeah,
we should say Hannah Gutierrez Reed. She was very young. I think she was 23, maybe not even. Yeah. And she was. This was. I don't know if it was her very first time doing this kind of job, but she was also at a certain point in the production, she was doing double duty as like a prop assistant or maybe even prop master, which is unheard of, really. And we should say that her father was a pretty well-known armorer in Hollywood. This is a job that he had been doing for many decades. When you started to make this film, I mean, obviously, it sounds like you approached it through to telling Halyna's story, which really it is. But when you sort of started looking around at what had happened on this set, at how somebody actually managed to get shot with live ammunition, which I think a lot of people are confused as to why there would be any kind of real bullets in a gun on a movie set. What kind of pieces did you start to put together?
Well, first off, there should not ever be any live ammunition on a set. That is unheard of. It shouldn't even be. Maybe a security guard at the entrance of a set could have a real, or cops if they're, but not once you are in the world of a set, there should be no bullets. But I learned. I mean, one of the chilling aspects of this story is not necessarily what one might just think of as like, wow, real bullets on a set. First off, that is chilling. But what I kind of started to observe was that there was this ability for everyone to maybe note that something didn't seem right and not have much of a sense that they needed to do anything about it. And that, I think, is something that afflicts sets everywhere in the world. And I hate to say this, but the next set accident or death is not going to be a gun. It'll be something else. And that's what I realized is like sets are very, very, very dangerous, high, really high intensity projects. You are on this incredibly fast paced schedule and everyone there doesn't know each other that well. So you're almost like in a world where, there may be a person with a really cranky personality over here. And then there might be like a really quiet person over here. And then there might be like these three people getting into a fight over there. It's a whirlwind of personalities. And Rust was no different. And there were some very loud, vocal, angry people who were complaining about certain things, which were fair enough. Safety concerns were real. But amidst the many different things they were complaining about, guns was on that list. But when you're, the loudest voice in the room and you have 12 things on that list and you're bringing them all up to the first AD at the same time. And he's like, okay, which is it? COVID protocols? Is that what you're mad about? Hotels, the drive, guns? Okay, let's just go through that list. And so there were people who were being loud, but they were complaining about a bunch of things simultaneously. And then when I was sitting in the courtroom watching the trial, that's when I realized, oh, wow, many, many, many people were kind of aware from like the side of their, peripheral vision. They would see that armorer she seems overwhelmed. That armorer seems sloppy. And but you only in hindsight, when you've had a horrible tragedy, go back and think, God, I wish I had said something. And yet what was most chilling to me was how many people did see something. In fact, I would say everyone saw something. Everyone saw that she seemed overwhelmed and this didn't seem normal, because normally armorers lock their gear up and have a complete handle on every little gun, anything with guns. And Hannah didn't have that. There were guns sort of floating around. There were, bullets on carts. There were things that just seemed abnormal. But in the film industry, you sort of don't go out of your department. Well, I'm in the costume department. I'm going to focus on costumes. I'm not supposed to get into, the armory is the armory. I'm doing this over here. I'm the actor. And it makes sense because it's highly specialized work. And also you're on a time crunch. So the costume designer doesn't have time to like deal with whatever problem is on the gun set. But so in my interviews, do I think any one person is, including Hannah, a sociopath that wanted to kill somebody? I will say no, because I now have a lot of experience with a sociopath that wanted to kill somebody, and it's the furthest thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
we're going to get to that. You're not talking about a present company, not applicable here. Okay, yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's that. It's just that these people are going to suffer for the rest of their lives with an horrible ordeal that, they feel the guilt, the weight of this. And yes, absolutely negligence is baked into this. But there was a much larger scenario that I think many sets can learn from this one incident.
With respect to what actually happened, there was a gun scene. Halyna was the DP, the director of photography. Yeah. So that means that she would not have normally been like standing in front of the actors. Like normally the cinematographer is sort of off to the side looking into a video monitor. But that's not what was happening at this particular moment.
Right. And you could look at this particular scenario as like a cascade of awful things that just aligned so perfectly, to use that word, but it just, had they not aligned each and every one of these things, she wouldn't be dead. Someone else might be dead, but not Halyna. Halyna was standing in the position she was because there was a camera crew walk off that day. And that's what I was speaking to, this idea of like some of the people that were very vocal about safety concerns. Well, they walked off, and one of the most heartbreaking things for me to have read that morning was that morning Halyna had texted Joel that, they went back and forth. Did you see Lane's email? And then she wrote, yes. And they didn't even bother to tell the camera crew. And so that was...
Who is Lane? Sorry, just so we understand. Who's Lane?
Lane Looper is a guy who was the AC, the assistant camera operator. And, I've had many conversations with Lane, and I think he is... worthy of a lot of sympathy because in your wildest imagination, doing something like walking off a set, yes, it's a very aggressive move to try to make a point. But had he even for a second thought it would have caused the death of somebody, especially a person he cared about, I don't think he would have for a minute. It's just a horrifying thing for him. But I say what really happened because in reading Halyna's text messages, she was really, really upset that Lane walked off without so much as telling her. And, Joel has made this point to me later, like, well, this stuff kind of happens. You get into a dramatic moment and you realize, oh, damn it, I forgot to tell Halyna. I'll call her later. Had nothing happened, they would have cleared the air. But that's not what happened. That morning, they walked off and she had to scramble because she wasn't going to leave her own set. And that's not what a cinematographer would do. A cinematographer has to complete this task. And so she was left on some level high and dry because they walked off. And in our film, there's one of the most heartbreaking interviews is with the guy whose job it is to put a monitor in front of a person so the DP could be looking at it. And so Halyna would not have been standing right there had those people not walked off. And again, I have nothing but sadness for the trauma they endure because they didn't expect anything like this to happen. Therefore, Halyna's standing there in front of the gun just with absolutely nothing but her hands as she's framing up the shot. And, Alec gave an interview describing what he saw. Dave Hall saw it. Everyone saw this exact thing. And I can picture it myself because Halyna was such a creative person. She would have wanted to see how it looked. There's no doubt in my mind that actually she was just standing there trying to frame up a shot. And on no planet would a gun have a bullet in it. That wouldn't have been a thought. So that's what happened. She was standing right in front of a gun at point blank range and it went off.
Okay. And it was Alec Baldwin. So I don't even know if this was a rehearsal, was it a rehearsal or were they actually shooting? Not that it really matters, but he had the gun.
Yeah. It was an unplanned rehearsal. So in fact, part of why that camera crew walk off sort of threw everything in the day out of whack. They weren't necessarily even going to do this particular thing, but because as Joel says, in our interview, if you watch the film, things sort of went, you just had to figure it out. You're going to improvise that day. Okay. So we don't have time to do these two things over here. You make up for the day by doing some other stuff. And this is very common in film when something, throws off your schedule. Well, you really have to think fast and be creative. So one of the things they were just going to do is test this idea out. And they walked into the church and that's what it was unplanned. And so on some level, that lack of planning, all the different things that go into you're supposed to get everything together on a schedule, but this was a improvised moment, which might have also led to the danger issue.
Okay. And we should say this was the set of a church. This was a Western town. That was the movie set. So Alec Baldwin has this gun. He shoots it, obviously thinking that there's nothing in it. It hits Halyna. It also hits Joel Souza, the director. Can you just describe the sort of series of events in terms of the actual shooting?
Well, Alec pulled the gun out. First, actually, when he asked for the gun, it was handed to him by Hannah Gutierrez, I believe it was. There was a chain of events. You're supposed to examine a gun before anyone gets it. And Hannah looked at the gun, showed it then to Dave Halls. And Dave says that he spun it, looked at it, and assumed, okay, those are all dummies. There's not a world in which there's an assumption that in his mind that they weren't. To be more, careful about everything, you would have taken each and every one out, looked at it closely. They didn't do that. They just visually examined it. And then the gun got handed to Alec. And Alec pulled it out and pulled the hammer back. And then, according to Alec, he didn't pull the trigger, but it doesn't seem possible for the gun to have fired without the trigger being pulled. One way or another, regardless, a real bullet came out of that gun and passed through Joel Souza's body, passed through Halyna's body because she has an in wound and an out wound, and then Joel got hit with it, and it got lodged in him. And Halyna's body actually slowed down the speed of the bullet. So, Joel survived and Halyna didn't.
Wow. And so they call an EMT, they call 911. They're out in the desert.
Yeah.
So how long does it take for help to arrive?
I mean, the medic, and I've also talked to her at length about this. This is another tragic aspect of the story. Had she, even in her wildest imaginings, brought what she could have thought would be, preparation for gun injuries, it's hard to know if anything would have come out differently, but she was not prepared for a gun injury, and nor should she have imagined that would be possible, because you're not supposed to have real bullets. So she was working on
the medic on the set, we should say.
Yes.
You're talking about the medic on the set.
Exactly.
And there's always a medic on a set.
Yeah.
That is a standard job.
Yeah, there was a set medic, and she valiantly attempted to save Halyna's life. And then there happened to also be a guy who actually was not tasked with this, but he happened to have Army medic training. His name is Matt Hammer, and he jumped into action, even though his job was lighting on the set, not medic. He helped the medic. So the two of them, Sherlyn Schaefer and Matt Hammer, did as much as they possibly could before actual paramedics got there and airlifted Halyna, and Joel was put into an ambulance and taken to hospitals.
Okay. And you say in the film, it's a really poignant, devastating moment, that she actually died in the helicopter on the way to the hospital.
She was, that's what she flatlined and then was pronounced dead when she got to the hospital. And so I've always thought about that moment, because she was just sort of like hovering, I don't know, you get very spiritual when you're out in New Mexico and you're also thinking about what happened to your friend. And I was right there, in the adjacent ranch, just thinking about that. And the helicopter, lifted off, and there was no ability to save her. So she died in the sky.
You have footage in the film of various people being questioned by the police and prosecutors, most prominently Alec Baldwin. And we see him being questioned. I mean, obviously he's shocked, he's devastated, he can't imagine how this has happened. And we actually see the moment in the questioning room where he's told that Halyna has died. And he's just absolutely, he withers.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a horrible moment. And when you make a documentary, often you have access to footage and you question whether or not you should use it. There was a lot of footage that we did not use, actually, because it was, felt invasive. And in many ways, that feels that way to me as well. It was a horrible, horrible, personal, private moment. And yet it was widely shown all over the world by the time we made this film. And so I realized, people had seen that clip before of Alec grabbing his heart and just having that moment. So I didn't feel like, using that shot where you see him was the wrong thing to do because of that. However, I wanted to make sure we could really imbue it with the power of what that moment really felt like. So I let that footage really, I specifically wanted that to last as long as possible when you're living with that moment, because that's actually what I had to live with. I remember exactly that same feeling. Alec grasped that. And when I was told Halyna died, I just had the almost exact same feeling. And so I was grateful to be able to really showcase that moment because it was the horror. It's like a real life, actual horror movie. And yet you have to grapple with that type of reality when you're learning of something so awful. And I think Alec has not been given the basic dignity of just being a guy who suffered a trauma. So that to me felt important.
He was ultimately charged with manslaughter. And you take a lot of time in the film to talk with the prosecutors, to talk with, various people on the legal team, explaining why they went ahead with those charges. Can you explain? Because I think, people making comments on the internet might have been all for that. But certainly from my perspective, it felt very unfair when I heard the news that he was being charged.
I mean, I think a lot of what the prosecutor did was important to try to find answers. I think that was, at the end of the day, Carrie Morrissey, like everyone, was like outraged that this could have happened and looking for answers. And, in the world of law enforcement, even when I was speaking to the cops, they were like, yeah, you don't get to point a gun at someone, have it go off and kill them, and then have no consequences. They didn't understand that, like, well, wait, this is a film set. They're like, no, you don't get to use real guns and not handle a gun properly. And so on some level, there's a reality to that when genuine, real law enforcement, people who are in the world of there's consequences for guns, for killing people, for all of it over here. And then there's fictional Hollywood over here. Those two worlds do not intersect until something horrific happens. And I think what I learned from Carrie and from the OSHA detective, all the people in the real world, they were like, no, you don't get to play with guns. You don't get to actually do things that could really hurt people without facing actual criminal charges. And I think in our world of like, but wait a minute, Hollywood's not supposed to be like that. And it's all fiction. There's this hard reality that was just thrust upon everybody. And I think, I don't know if it's set an example to the entire world of Hollywood that you could get in trouble no matter who you are, because you've been handling a gun, and it should just, it's not that it's Alec or anyone. It's just, you don't get to have a gun in your hand with a bullet in it. And so there was this real rude awakening for me too, when I was just in the courtroom every day thinking, God, wait, there's probably sets right now where something else is, you're driving at speeds that are not allowed. Like there's laws that are there for a reason. But on film sets, we kind of break them. And so that was, in some way, the world that Carrie comes out of, the prosecutor, is the world of real hard truths about life and death and laws. And Hollywood is over here doing other things, playing make-believe. So I just witnessed that, and it felt to me kind of like a reckoning that hadn't really happened.
That's really well said. And it gets to the central question, really, which is, why was there live ammunition on this set at all? What possible need would there be for that? And moreover, maybe this is a naive question, but why are there real guns? Like, I guess I thought that they used fake guns in movies.
Well, when I was speaking to one of the stunt department heads who happened to be from Germany, he said, we haven't used real guns in years in Europe. And so I thought, wow, why can't we do what Europe does? Well, I guess because we're American, we don't do what anyone else does. So to answer your question, well, the second part of it is that the armoring profession is historically really safe. And it sounds weird to say that because my friend died. And yet the history of armoring, you have hardly any awful, terrible injuries, accidents, or deaths. And the few that we have are really notable and they're high profile. But if you look at, the last death before Halyna was Brandon Lee, that, I really hate to say this, but it's actually a good track record. It means it's been safe. And so this incident had so many levels of failure baked into it. The primary one being, with the armor. But I think one of those things that we're looking at is more like the safety issues in general on sets. stunts and explosives and high-speed chases and people being asleep, at the wheel after a 14-hour day because they have 2 more hours to drive home.
Yeah.
And there have been deaths since Halyna. There's been like 5 since Halyna died that are well known. Accidents, somebody fell off a lighting rig, a car crash. But those didn't involve a celebrity. So we're not really aware of them in the mainstream media. They were known in the industry and they're sad and everyone feels bad, but we're not investigating it to the degree that this got investigated in the public.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I want to get back to the gun thing in a second, but while we're on that, are these happening more frequently because budgets are tighter? Like presumably these are not happening on like multi-million dollar movie sets. What kind of environments are most vulnerable to this sort of thing?
I mean, sad to say, a Marvel film was the site of one of them. So I can't imagine a bigger budget. And it was a studio that I would have thought was like well-equipped, Radford Studios in Burbank. A guy fell from what I understand, a very high distance on a lighting rig that something malfunctioned. So, is it small budget? It's not necessarily small budget. And there's a really great documentary called The Boy Who Lived about Daniel Radford's stunt double, who, there's also, again, not a higher budget movie than a Harry Potter movie. And this guy is so lucky that he survived, although he has probably the worst type of injury you could ever have, a full paralysis. It was a stunt accident.
Wow. Okay, but let's get back to the gun thing, because you as a filmmaker, can you explain why? Okay, let's start here. Why would they not use like a fake gun? They can do amazing things with props. They can do amazing things. Like, why do we have to have a real gun? And then I want to get to this question of why there were live bullets on the set at all.
There's a handful of reasons for using real guns. And, I've spoken to armorers since then where production companies have tried to switch to CGI. And it actually is budgetarily cheaper to use real guns. There's a lot of work involved in post-production and making sure the shot looks realistic. And you have to do a lot of work on, who knows, maybe AI will be a source of help for this particular thing. But still to this day, apparently, from one of the experts I've spoken to, armorers, real, genuine, actual guns is cost effective. And if you hire a good armorer, you are like, there's absolutely no problem. I hate to say that because it sounds like, the armoring profession took a giant hit from this unfairly because most of these guys are highly trained. A lot of them are ex-military. They lock their guns down. They know exactly where things are. So, it's actually not a risk if you look at it that way to hire a really good armorer. But the CGI thing aside, and I promise I won't, I'll get off of this in a second, but like, why can't you just have like a prop gun? There's all kinds of guns. Kids have toy guns all the time and police officers think that they're real guns. Like, does a real gun look that much better in a movie shot? I'll say this, in a close-up, if you're a gun person, you can tell it's not real. That being said, can you stage a close-up of a real gun in the most absolutely safe way imaginable? Definitely. But another question is, why have real guns at all? 100% I will not use guns myself personally. That being said, I've spoken to actors who feel very strongly that they need that feeling of a kickback to make it feel real. Directors who Quentin Tarantino famously feels the need to, see that reality. This is an artistic profession. So people do things for artistic reasons. And they're not doing things for like safety reasons. They're doing them for artistic reasons. So given that their decisions are creative, some people land on that place of like they need the authenticity of that real look. I personally don't feel that way, but I highly doubt that I'll make a film. Who knows, but with a gun where I need to feel that sense of it.
Okay. And in terms of the live ammunition, how in the world did that end up anywhere near this set? Real bullets.
I mean, this is still a question that is outstanding, because I will say in those court trials, especially when Alec's trial ended the way it did, it ended before we could get answers really to that specific question. Did Hannah bring them onto the set herself? Did somebody, that she was working with connect, various ones? That is a real question that there's actually no definitive answer to. And there were lots of theories, that there was a target practice on a previous set with real ammunition, that it got mixed in. And I would say that could easily sound possible. I wish I knew. I wish I actually knew how that happened. But the reality is a real live bullet got put into a gun. And, the armorer is the person who has that one job to do, to look at each and every bullet that goes into the gun before it gets handed over to somebody. And the first AD has the job to check it. So those two people rightfully were the ones that had all the attention focused on them and served the consequences for what happened.
In terms of the consequences, so Hannah, she was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison. She was released after serving a portion of the sentence. I think she also completed a drug rehab program. I'm kind of curious about that. As we just said, she was just released on May 23rd. Was the first AD also implicated? Who else was faced? Who did anyone else go to prison?
The first AD pled guilty of negligence, and his plea deal allowed him, I think, a period of probation. He didn't serve any jail time, but he was very forthcoming. And in our film, he admitted his guilt in that. And I think there was a lot to that admission of guilt, because it says a lot to say, I should have checked and I didn't. Hannah, however, was found guilty by a jury of 12, of course, in Santa Fe. And then she was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and she will be a felon for the rest of her life. She served that time in prison. So.
Why didn't she take a plea deal?
She didn't ever say that she was guilty. So, there was that was, and I think who knows, maybe she could have, I don't know what her lawyers advised her, but she did not admit guilt. She was, found guilty.
There's an interesting dynamic which you kind of hint at in the film, and that's the one between Hannah and her father. Her father was apparently like a very long-standing armorer in the business, like I said at the top. And, he's seen in the documentary several times saying, oh, well, she's going to be fine. She's not going to be convicted. This is all going to be cleared up. It's not her fault. And I thought that was curious. And I just thought it was curious that somebody so young would be put in this position. Maybe I'm being ageist, but as somebody in the industry, does it seem strange to you that somebody so young would have this job?
I mean, now it really does. At the same time, I could imagine, a really well-trained young person who might have even had military experience. Who knows? A responsible. I would say the things that raised more red flags were not only just her age, but more her demeanor and the lack of authority that she had. When you watch the footage, she didn't command authority. And in being at the trial, there was a armorer who took the stand, an expert, and you could see he absolutely commanded authority. And then the armorer who was on the set when Rust was completed absolutely commanded authority. And they would announce themselves, show up, everybody has to stop. There's a gun right here. And so you can see footage when Hannah was on set, where she would kind of be like, hey guys, okay, I'm going to show you something. And it just doesn't quite feel right once you know what is required when a gun shows up on set. You're really supposed to say, okay, everybody, stop what you're doing. There's a gun. This is a moment. Take a moment.
they did finish the film. Obviously, production was stopped for quite a long time. And then the decision was made to actually go back and get it done, largely because that's what Halyna would have wanted. Can you talk about that? How did you feel when you heard they were going to finish?
I mean, as someone who knew her personally, I totally understood it. It was, and I think there's maybe her friends might fall on different sides of this. Some friends feel like, wow, screw these people. On what planet should we let this film finish? And on the other hand, you think this was her film. She only got halfway through making it. She died making it. Let's just complete it for her. Her family wants it. And so that really was what was the reasoning behind finishing it. Her family wanted it. And really every single person in her family wanted this film completed. And so when I look at it in the perspective of just a victim of anything where a person dies, you find out what the family wants, you do what the family wants. And I was really horrified actually at the reaction, especially in the film community, that was so outraged and angry at the Rust crew. And to me, I still feel like it's unconscionable that people, held it against the crew who went back to finish it as if they were doing something wrong morally. Because, there was this idea that okay, well, an artist is an artist. You can't complete their painting. You don't know how they would do it. And I get that. And it's true. You can't finish someone's work and have it be 100% theirs. But if you know that their family wants it and that they died, how can you not do that? That is really, the people who have to live on this planet for the next however many years are her son, her widower, her mother, and her father, and her sister. And these people want that done. So I was really kind of disgusted that the film industry kind of blacklisted the Rust crew, because to me, they were actually doing the right thing. And many of them felt the same way. I wish I could have Halyna here finishing this film. I'm not doing it because, I just want this film done for myself. I'm doing it because of the family. And this is what we're doing to do right by the family. So those people, in my mind, will always be heroic. Every single person that completed that film, because they did it out of a sense of duty and loyalty to Halyna in the face of really actual damaging themselves. Many of them felt like they would never work again.
How do you think the film turned out? Halyna definitely had a real vision for the look of it. It's exciting for a cinematographer to make a Western, just for obvious reasons. She talks about how she was influenced by Terrence Malick films, and there was just a real kind of aesthetic that she felt strongly about. And they ended up having to hire, obviously, another DP, a woman, to come in and finish it. Talk about there's a lot on her shoulders. How do you think the film turned out?
I think it's a work of art. I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible. And it is a Halyna Hutchins film. And that is because Bianca Klein is so good at her craft that she replicated Halyna's vision. And Bianca, I remember at one point, was interviewed at Camera Image, and they were asking her well, how much of the film is yours and how much is hers? And she kind of bristled at the question, because she was like, my job was to complete Halyna's vision, to execute it. So it's 100% Halyna's, because a cinematographer sets the look. It wasn't Bianca's look, it was Halyna's look. Bianca executed it. And in my mind, what makes Bianca so heroic and also a master of her craft is it's really, really hard to replicate and complete someone else's thing. Someone establishes a look, the lengths they went to match shots so that Halyna's original shot could be constructed and completed. They would have things where the, actors were, they had filmed just one half of a scene, and then the actor would have to kind of act against somebody that wasn't there, and the lighting would have to match the other shot. And when you watch the film, the fact that it is seamless is a testament to the really amazing talent of the DP, Bianca Klein, perfectly executing Halyna's vision and being so committed to it. So I think, I think there's a beauty to the tribute to Halyna. And I think the film itself also, Joel deliberately made every effort to keep extra footage of Halyna's in there. So in some ways, it's ironic. I've read the reviews, and one of the best things about all the reviews is that for the very first time in her entire career, Halyna had the amazing honor of being reviewed by critics at the highest level. She had never gotten that kind of attention on her work until now. And Joel wanted that. That was why he finished the film, to allow Halyna that. And he gave that to her. I mean, it's the greatest gift anyone could ever do. And, you know, I think that the film itself is an amazing story, a fascinating film. And I think it's really a great film, personally.
So I'm glad to hear that even though the crew was sort of blacklisted within the industry, like critics did not blacklist the film. It sounds like they did write about it, but was it distributed? Was it in theaters? Have people gone to see it?
Yeah, it actually had a small theatrical release, and now it is available. You can look it up and watch it. And I think it's on video on demand. And I will say, I think the crew who finished it were temporarily blacklisted. And thanks to our film, you know, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I think our film showed the reality that people didn't realize. And anyone who has any bad feelings about the Rust crew should watch our film and understand what they went through, and your entire view of them will change.
Well, it is a great film. And like I said, I really love your work. I could talk to you all day about it. And I want to bring you back another time to talk not only about an earlier film of yours, which has to do with growing up in an adult bookstore, and your parents
Right.
were the owners of Circus of Books in Silver Lake in Los Angeles. You also recently had a 3-part series about this family of vloggers. That's not a word that I feel like we hear about so much. It's called An Update on Our Family, about this like horrible story about these influencers who had a bunch of adopted kids, and they ended up having to relinquish one of them. I don't know how much you want to touch on that.
Well, actually, I will say they had a bunch of biological kids, and then they adopted one kid, and the kid that they adopted had a lot of medical issues, and they adopted him internationally. And if you watch the series, although it's actually a well-known story of what happened, they dissolved the adoption, and that whole thing played out publicly. And I think what our series, An Update on Our Family, it's on HBO Max, it really opened up the larger story of what it means to share your kids' lives on the internet. Because as adults, you know, you can do whatever you want and share your own life, but do kids really have consent? And when a scandal happens, or a tragedy, really, like a horrible personal tragedy, what are the consequences when the world is, you know, dying for answers and staying up to date with your personal family life, and your kids are right there, and people get to know your kids? And I think there's this blurry line that, you know, our series does not paint family vloggers as like evil, awful people. It paints them as people that got, you know, were on the internet, and then people were excited about their content, and people wanted to see their kids. And the next thing you know, that's where they're making their money, and they can't stop. And here it is, suddenly you're, you know, barreling down this hill, and you have to have your kids on the internet 24/7. How did we get here? Well, a lot of it has to do with the way that YouTube incentivized, past tense, because I know that things are changing, but they incentivized content, and the fact that kids were in that content didn't matter. It was doing well, so you may as well continue to upload, and really crazy things started to happen. So that's the story. It's called An Update on Our Family.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that more at some point. But before we wrap up, when we started this conversation, you're so heavily involved in a new project that you actually thought that we were going to be talking about that. It has to do with serial killer.
Yeah.
What can you say about that at this point?
Well, just last week I was in Oklahoma interviewing a person who is serving multiple life sentences for murder, multiple murders, many murders, in fact, and a team of local just community members in the gay LGBT community here in Los Angeles solved a cold case. We worked together. It was just a remarkable collaboration with people who I happened to know because Circus of Books, my parents' store, had connections to the victim of this crime. And I had personal connections to the victim of this crime. And it was an unthinkable thing to imagine what happened. This guy was actually dismembered. His head and his feet were found in a dumpster. And I read an article about it. It was in 1990 when it happened. And I couldn't unlink myself from trying to figure out how maybe we could solve it. And amazingly, we did solve it. And speaking to the killer, I've learned now about a historical reckoning that I think this film is going to explore, which is gay bashing murders. You know about Matthew Shepard, but I don't think people are aware that there was a lot more than that, and especially here in Los Angeles. So I'm very excited about this new project that I'm working on. And right now I'm in the final stages, fundraising to complete it, doing it all very grassroots, which feels right for this project because it was a grassroots effort to solve the murder. So it's sort of a grassroots effort to finish the film too.
Well, can you say a little bit more about how this murder was solved when you say like if people in the LGBT community came together?
Yeah.
Is there a next door? Is there a next door thread for solving murders? How do they find each other? How did this come about?
Okay. A little bit more about that. So there's a podcast called The Dinner Party Show. And these two guys authors named Christopher Rice, whose mother happens to be Anne Rice, a big, humongous writer. So Christopher Rice and his podcast partner, Eric Shaw Quinn, who are both these really funny, witty guys who make a podcast, authors. They happened to do an episode about Billy London, or Billy Newton was his real name. But I was listening to that show and riveted because I had been focused on him for years and trying to put pieces together. And they do a lot of shows about different murders. And this one had haunted the gay community in Los Angeles for decades. When they did the show about him, they said, if anyone has information, we're going to just put a call out there. So somebody actually did call in and say, I really think I saw Billy leave a bar that night that he was left with Jeffrey Dahmer, and the thought of Jeffrey Dahmer thrown out there into the wilderness on the podcast actually ignited a real LAPD detective, John Lamberti. He was listening and said, I'll look into this. And as soon as I found out myself that John Lamberti was involved, I was like, wow, hold on. I've been in the weeds for years looking at the different puzzle pieces of people I knew surrounding the victim. I had been thinking I could eventually talk to law enforcement, but now there's a cop who's actually involved. So I reached out to John Lamberti, connected dots with him, and just started pouring through all the information that he could possibly share with me. And around this time, a social worker knew about what I was doing, that media had been generated, because I thought, what a great idea to get some media in Wisconsin. Because if anyone would have found out about Jeffrey Dahmer coming to Los Angeles, if that was true, we'd have to get some media. So I made an effort to get some media in Wisconsin involved. And sure enough, what happened was that a guy named Clark Williams, who's a social worker by training, said, Rachel, I know that you're making a documentary. I happen to come from the place where the victim came from, northern Wisconsin. And I can just simply tell you what an ordeal it was to come from northern Wisconsin in the 1980s. If you're going to paint the portrait of his life, you should know more. And of course, I thought, wow, that's great. I'd love to meet this guy. Little did I know, Clark had some incredible, just absolute research skills that were unbelievable. So I started feeding Clark all the information that I could from what I had gathered from the LAPD. And suddenly Clark was off and running and putting things together from all of my research, because I had interviewed lots and lots of people. I had my own spreadsheet of information. I had gotten, information connected from the LAPD as well. And Clark miraculously started looking at who was involved in the investigation. And there was one person who, as it turns out, had been deeply involved in the police work and had been a sort of a community member handing the police information for decades. Well, that person, as it turned out, was a gay adult film producer and had been casting a guy in his films who now currently is serving life in prison for murder. And there were enough things about this guy that the cops looked at it, said, you know what? He was out on parole at this time. He has a really violent past. Let's check him out. So they went and interviewed him in prison. Although now she is a she goes by that, transitioned. All the story just doesn't stop getting crazier. And the cops came back with a confession immediately with all of the details needed to absolutely, with certainty, say this is the killer of Billy. And I just spoke to her last week, and I've been in touch for 2 years now, letter writing, phone calls, and videos, and have gathered not just information about the murder of Billy, but other murders.
Wow. Is this what you ever thought you would be doing as a filmmaker?
You know, it's really weird. I can't imagine. No, not at all. But I've been a little bit like a bystander in life in that way. I just feel like sometimes the right things come at me, and and I'm there to catch them because I really was here mostly in the right place in the right time to, help the different people connect with each other.
You're an independent filmmaker, obviously. We're hearing more and more about how Hollywood is dead or dying. People are leaving the industry. People are leaving Los Angeles. How do you feel about the industry sort of in general and about your career in particular?
It's interesting to feel like I am strangely thriving, or at least bouncing along and floating okay right now. In a really dark moment in the industry. But I will say it hasn't been easy. And in my last film, I felt the commercial pressures big time. And that's part of the reason why I'm protecting this project. I'm deliberately not trying to get it sold right now. I'm not trying to get, I felt what it was like when suddenly you are well-financed and you are, you have a network original project. And when you're doing something personal, it can be really hard to protect it from the commercial pressures, which want certain things. So that's what I think filmmakers are up against. The pressures to deliver what the streamers want, no matter what the ethical concerns you might have are over here. That is the real rub for documentary people, I think, because these are real stories and real people. And I'm not willing to hurt people. That is sort of my bottom. Like, I don't want people to get hurt by my films. And if it happens, to me, that is a actual tragedy. And yet, when you're in the world of commercial product, there's just very different concerns. And so the lone filmmaker has to stand there being like, hold on, I gotta do some protection mechanisms because, it's just the case that, there will always be, the push-pull of commercial pressures, and you have to find ways. Granted, I'm also not on the other side of things where I will totally say, no, I'm going to do everything completely independently and make my film and just protect it and basically exist in a place where it'll be really hard to find and hard to see. I actually want that platform. I care about these stories having an audience because I believe that is how you can change things, especially with this project I'm doing about Billy London. I think that it's really important to look at some of the historical aspects of the LGBT community that were not known before, the amount of hateful gay bashing and murders that happened historically that I don't think has been known until now.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you do, Rachel. I'm such a deep admirer of your work, and I love this conversation. Rachel, thank you for making this film, Last Take. I think a lot of people, myself included, were confused about what happened, and a lot of the media coverage was also confusing. And so you just laid everything out really clearly and really sensitively. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you. And likewise, Meghan, I'm so glad that you're out there having great conversations with people. So thank you.
Well, hope we can talk again.
Yeah, me too.
That was my conversation with filmmaker Rachel Mason, talking about a number of her projects, especially Last Take, Rust, and the Story of Halyna. This is the Unspeakable Podcast, slowly being named the Unspeakeasy. I don't know. We'll get there eventually, maybe by the end of the summer. Speaking of the Unspeakeasy, I want to remind you of our co-ed retreat coming up in New York City this October 11th and 12th. We have an amazing lineup of guest speakers, including John McWhorter, Carol Hooven, Peter Moskos, many. I won't list them all here. Go to theunspeakeasy.com/retreats to find out about that. Again, if you are not a part of the Catastrophe Hour Book Club, that's the book club I'm running every Wednesday from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about an essay per week from my new book, The Catastrophe Hour. Get in on it. This is available to paying subscribers to the Substack if you're subscribing at the annual level. So go to the unspeakablepodcast.com or megandown.substack.com to find out how to join that. It's a lot of fun. I will be back next week with another super nuanced guest. See you then.